They twisted the legs of the dead before burying them, not for ritual, not for ceremony, to keep them from walking, to ensure they stayed in the ground. In 2003, archaeologists excavating near China's most famous tomb found 121 skeletons. The legs on many had been deliberately broken and twisted post-mortem, a burial practice specific to the Qin dynasty, documented in multiple archaeological sites from 221 to 207 BCE. But these weren't executed criminals or human sacrifices from some ancient ritual. The bronze plaques buried with them told a different story. They were construction workers. Their bones revealed stress fractures consistent with years of carrying extreme weight, compressed vertebrae from bearing loads that should have required machinery. Some showed blade wounds to the ribs, others had skull fractures from blunt force trauma. The forensic evidence suggested these injuries occurred at or near the time of death. These were the people who built what we now call the eighth wonder of the world, the Terracotta Army. 7,000 life-sized clay soldiers, each one unique, standing guard over the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. And they were just a fraction of the 700,000 workers who, according to historical records, were conscripted to build the emperor's underground empire over 38 years. But here's what historians couldn't explain until recently. Why would the state bother with official burial rites, complete with the twisted leg practice reserved for important deaths? For common construction workers? Who conducted these burials? And what did these 121 people know that made their deaths necessary? The ancient historian Sima Qian, writing a century after the tomb's completion, left us a passage that haunted scholars for 2,000 years. When describing how the tomb was sealed, he wrote that the middle gate was shut and the outer gate closed to imprison all the artisans and laborers, so that not one came out. For 2 millennia, most historians dismissed this as propaganda. Mass entombment of workers? Impossible. Illogical. The stuff of myth designed to make a hated emperor look monstrous. Then they found the bodies, and the bodies told a different story. This is not the story of the Terracotta Army you've heard before. This is the story of what it actually cost to build it. The story of teenagers conscripted into labor they wouldn't survive. The story of technology so advanced it wouldn't be matched for 2,000 years, created by workers who faced execution for imperfection. The story of names carved in clay that outlasted an empire. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at those clay soldiers the same way again. The truth began to surface on a March afternoon in 1974. Let me take you there. Part 1. The well that changed everything. The heat was unbearable that March afternoon in 1974. Shanxi province in Tharz. In the heart of China's northwestern plateau, bakes under the sun in early spring, and the farmers of Xiang village knew drought when they felt it coming. The persimmon trees needed water. The crops would wither without it. And so, 7 brothers from the Yang family, along with their neighbor Wang Puji, took up their shovels and began to dig. They chose a spot about 1.5 miles east of an ancient burial mound that locals called Mount Li. The mound had stood there for over 2,000 years, a pyramid-shaped hill rising from the farmland, largely ignored by generations of farmers who worked the fields around it. Everyone knew it was old. Some said it was the tomb of China's first emperor. But tombs were tombs, and fields were fields, and water was what mattered on that particular afternoon. The digging went smoothly at first. The soil was loose, sandy, reddish in color. Yang Jifa, the eldest brother at 24, worked alongside Yang Peiyan, Yang Xinman, Yang Kuanyi, Yang Wenshui, Yang Yanxin, and Yang Yizhou. Their neighbor Wang Puji dug beside them. They reached 3 meters down without incident, then 4 meters, and then at about 4.5 meters depth, young Jifa's shovel struck something hard. Not rock, not root, something that shattered. He knelt down, brushing away the loose soil, and his fingers found smooth, curved surfaces. Pottery. But not ordinary pottery. As he cleared more dirt, he saw that it was reddish terracotta, the pieces too large and too thick to be from any household vessel. He called the others over. Together they uncovered what appeared to be a shoulder, an arm, and then, unmistakably, a life-sized human head. The head was astonishing. It had ears, a nose, eyes that seemed almost alive, despite being carved from clay. The hair was detailed, braided, and pulled into a top knot. For a moment, the farmers simply stared. Then one of them, perhaps remembering childhood stories, said what they were all thinking. They had found a pottery god. What happened next would horrify archaeologists when they learned about it years later. The farmers took some of the pottery fragments home. They used them as building materials. They gave pieces to neighbors. Some fragments were even used to scare away mice from grain stores, a practice based on local superstition about protective spirits. But as they continued digging and found more pieces, bronze arrowheads green with age, crossbow triggers with mechanisms still recognizable after millennia, more pottery fragments showing armor detailed with individual scales, the farmers began to suspect this was more than superstition. This was something important, perhaps something dangerous to have kept secret. After several days of quiet deliberation among themselves, they decided to report the find to the local authorities. Within days, word reached the Lintong Museum, where an archaeologist named Zhao Kangmin heard about the discovery. Zhao Kangmin arrived at the site on April 27, 1974. What he saw in that well shaft changed his life and eventually our understanding of ancient China. The pottery fragments were clearly from the Qin dynasty, the brief but transformative period from 221 to 207 BCE, when China was unified for the first time. The style, the craftsmanship there, the materials, all pointed to that era. But then Zhao noticed something that made his blood run cold. The pieces weren't from vessels or roof tiles. They were from human figures, life-sized human figures. And judging by the armor fragments, these were soldiers. He knew the stories. Every archaeologist working in Shanxi province knew that somewhere near Mount Li lay the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. The ancient texts mentioned it, but they also mentioned something else, something that seemed too fantastical to be real. The historian Sima Qian had written, over 2,000 years ago, about an underground palace filled with wonders. But Sima Qian never mentioned an army of pottery soldiers. No historical text did, which meant one of two things. Either Zhao had stumbled onto something completely unknown to history, or the tomb complex was so much larger and more elaborate than anyone had imagined that an entire army could have been buried there, without ancient historians even knowing about it. Both possibilities were extraordinary. Both turned out to be true. Zhao carefully collected every fragment the farmers had found and transported them back to the museum. There, over the following weeks, he painstakingly cleaned and restored what he could, piecing together the broken parts like an enormous three-dimensional puzzle. What emerged were two nearly complete terracotta warriors, standing about 6 feet tall, their faces remarkably lifelike, their armor detailed down to the individual laces and ties. He immediately wrote a report to his superiors, explaining what he believed they had discovered. Not random pottery, but likely part of a vast funerary complex associated with the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. His report reached the provincial cultural authorities, then made its way to Beijing, to the central government. A journalist visiting relatives in the area heard about the discovery and wrote an article that caught the attention of national officials. By mid-July 1974, just 4 months after the farmers struck that first piece of terracotta, a full archaeological team had been assembled. They arrived with equipment, funding, and a mandate to excavate systematically what would soon be designated as Pit 1. As they began to dig, methodically, scientifically, what they uncovered defied all expectations. Row upon row of soldiers emerged from the earth, infantry in battle robes, archers with crossbows, cavalry beside their horses, charioteers standing ready in wooden war chariots that had long since rotted away, leaving only the bronze fittings and the terracotta horses. The figures stood in military formation, facing east, arrayed as if preparing for battle. Each warrior was life-sized, weighing between 300 and 400 pounds. Each was unique. As the excavation expanded, the true magnitude became clear. Pit 1 alone measured 230 meters long and 62 meters wide, covering over 14,000 square meters. It would eventually yield more than 6,000 figures. But Pit 1 was only the beginning. In 1976, archaeologists discovered Pit 2 to the northeast, containing cavalry units, war chariots, and complex battle formations. That same year, they found Pit 3, smaller but clearly a command post, with high-ranking officers and a single chariot. The discovery made international headlines. But what happened next nearly became one of archaeology's greatest tragedies. When the first warriors were excavated in 1974-1975, archaeologists noticed traces of bright paint on the figures: reds, purples, blues, greens. The warriors had originally been vividly colored, painted to look like living soldiers. Excited by this discovery, the excavation team worked quickly to document and recover as many figures as possible. Then they watched in horror as the paint began to disappear. Within seconds of exposure to Xi'an's dry air, the lacquer base layer, which had remained stable for 200 years underground, began to curl. Within 4 minutes, paint flakes started falling off. The team tried everything: spraying water, covering figures with wet cloths, rushing them to climate-controlled facilities. Nothing worked. By the time they understood what was happening, dozens of warriors had lost their original colors forever. This catastrophe changed archaeology. It taught researchers that sometimes the best preservation is leaving things buried. It's why today, approximately 6,000 warriors remain unexcavated in Pit 1 alone. Archaeologists know exactly where they are. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped their positions, but they've made the decision to leave them in place until conservation technology advances enough to preserve their colors. The warriors you see in museums and photographs today are mostly gray terracotta, ghosts of their original selves. But beneath the soil, thousands more wait in vibrant color, a hidden rainbow army standing guard in darkness, protected by the very earth that buried them. By the time the first protective museum building opened to the public in 1979, the Terracotta Army had already captured the world's imagination. Here was an underground garrison, a clay army thousands strong, buried for 200 years and remarkably preserved. French Prime Minister Jacques Chirac visited in 1978 and declared it the 8th wonder of the world, a title that has stuck ever since. But as the initial excitement settled and the careful work of excavation and study continued, archaeologists began to notice other things in the pits, not just the glorious warriors, but darker details. Evidence of fire damage, weapons missing from the figures' hands, broken statues, some crushed beneath collapsed wooden beams. And beyond the warrior pits, other burial sites, smaller pits, mass graves. In 2003, archaeologists discovered and excavated one such pit. It contained 121 skeletons, buried in a manner distinctly different from the warriors. These were not clay figures, these were human remains. The bones showed signs of heavy manual labor, stress fractures that form from carrying extreme weight repeatedly, vertebrae compressed from decades of burden. Bronze plaques found with the remains identified them as laborers and convicts who had worked on the mausoleum project. The skeletons averaged about 1.7 meters tall, roughly 5.5 feet, shorter than the clay warriors they had created. Most were between 15 and 40 years old. DNA analysis revealed they came from diverse ethnic backgrounds, drawn from all across the newly unified empire. Some bones showed cut marks from blades. Others revealed blunt force trauma to the skull. These weren't construction accidents. But here's the detail that changed everything. Several skeletons had been buried with their legs deliberately twisted, a specific Qin dynasty funerary practice. This wasn't a mass grave from disease or a construction collapse. These burials had been conducted according to official protocol. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If these workers received official burials, who conducted them? And why would the state bother with proper burial rites for common laborers unless something extraordinary had occurred? The ancient historian Sima Qian, writing a century after the tomb's completion, provides one possible answer. But his account is so disturbing that scholars debated its truth for 2,000 years. We'll return to what he claimed later. For now, understand this. These 121 bodies represent a tiny fraction of the 700,000 workers' historical records say labored on this project over 38 years. This is their story. The story rarely told when we marvel at the warriors' craftsmanship. The story of what it actually cost, in sweat, in suffering, and possibly in something far worse, to create the Terracotta Army. Let us meet the man who demanded its creation. Part 2. The Emperor Who Would Live Forever. To understand the Terracotta Army, you must first understand the man who ordered its creation. His name was Yingzheng, though history knows him as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of Qin, or more simply, the first emperor of China. He was born around 259 BCE, during one of the most chaotic periods in Chinese history. China in the 3rd century BCE was not a unified nation, but a patchwork of warring kingdoms. 7 major states battled for supremacy in what historians call the Warring States period, a time of near constant conflict that had lasted for more than 2 centuries. The Kingdom of Qin, based in the Wei River Valley in what is now Shanxi Province, was one of these 7 states, known for its military strength and harsh legal system. Yingzheng's birth was surrounded by circumstance both fortunate and controversial. His father, Zhuangxiang, was a prince of Qin who had been sent as a hostage to the rival state of Zhao as a guarantee of peace, a common diplomatic practice of the time. While in Zhao, Zhuangxiang met a woman named Zhao Ji, who would become Yingzheng's mother. Historical sources hint at scandal surrounding this union, with some suggesting Zhao Ji may have previously been connected to Lu Buwei, a powerful merchant who would become Qin's chancellor. Whether this is truth or later propaganda intended to diminish the emperor's legitimacy remains unclear, but it colored perceptions of the imperial family. When Yingzheng was born in Zhao, the political situation was precarious. Hostage princes and their families lived in constant danger, their lives forfeit should their home kingdoms break diplomatic agreements. When Yingzheng was young, relations between Qin and Zhao deteriorated, placing the prince and his family in genuine peril. They eventually fled back to Qin, where Zhuangxiang's fortunes improved dramatically. Through a combination of political maneuvering, strategic marriages, and sheer luck, Zhuangxiang was named heir apparent and, in 250 BCE, ascended to the throne of Qin as king. But Zhuangxiang's reign was brief. He died in 247 BCE, after ruling for only 3 years. Ying Zheng, just 13 years old, became king of Qin. Due to his youth, the actual governance fell to his mother Zhao Ji and Chancellor Lu Buwei, who effectively ran the kingdom while the young king came of age. Those early years of Ying Zheng's reign were turbulent. Historical sources paint a picture of a brilliant but difficult youth, already showing signs of the ruthlessness and ambition that would define his rule. When he was around 22 years old, he took full control of the government. His first major act was to deal with a scandal involving his mother and a man named Lao Ai, who had been introduced to the palace by Lu Buwei himself. When Ying Zheng discovered that his mother had borne 2 illegitimate children with Lao Ai, and that Lao Ai had attempted a coup to place those children on the throne, the young king's response was swift and merciless. He had Lao Ai executed by being torn apart by chariots. He ordered the 2 illegitimate children killed. He banished his mother from the capital. He forced Lu Buwei, who had orchestrated the introduction of Lao Ai to the palace, to commit suicide. The message was clear. No one, not family, not mentor, not anyone, would challenge the king's authority. With internal affairs secured, Ying Zheng turned his attention outward, to the other warring states. His advisors, particularly the legalist philosopher Li Si, crafted a strategy for conquest. One by one, beginning in 230 BCE, Qin armies marched against the other kingdoms. The state of Han fell first, then Zhao in 228, Wei in 225, Chu in 223, Yan in 222, and finally Qi in 221 BCE. At 38 years old, Ying Zheng stood as ruler of a unified China, the first time all the major states had been brought under single control. But the title of king no longer seemed sufficient for what he had achieved. In consultation with his advisors, he created a new title combining elements from the legendary 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of ancient myth. He would be Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. As Qin Shi Huang, he immediately set about restructuring the newly unified empire. He abolished the feudal system that had allowed local nobles to maintain power bases that could challenge central authority. Instead, he divided the empire into 36 military districts, each governed by officials appointed directly by him and subject to his recall. Wealthy noble families were forcibly relocated to the capital at Xianyang, where they could be watched and controlled. He standardized everything. Weights and measures, which had varied wildly between the former kingdoms, were now uniform throughout the empire. Currency was standardized, with the distinctive round coins with square holes becoming the universal medium of exchange. Even the axle width of carts was standardized so that vehicles from one region could use the rutted roads of another. Writing systems, which had diverged significantly during the centuries of division, were unified into a single script that could be read throughout the empire. These reforms transformed China. They made trade easier, communication more efficient, and administration more effective. The empire Qin Shi Huang created would, despite the Qin dynasty's brief existence, establish patterns that would last for over 2,000 years. His achievements were, by any measure, extraordinary. But the first emperor was more than his achievements. He was also a man consumed by fear and obsession. Multiple assassination attempts, including a famous near miss in 227 BCE, when a would-be assassin named Jing Ke came within feet of killing him, made Qin Shi Huang increasingly paranoid. He traveled constantly between his many palaces, never staying in one place long enough for plotters to anticipate his location. He trusted no one completely, and he feared death. The emperor's obsession with immortality became legendary. He consulted alchemists and sorcerers, seeking potions that would extend his life indefinitely. He sent expeditions across the Eastern Sea to search for the mythical Penglai, an island where immortals were said to dwell and where a medicine for eternal life supposedly grew. In 2017, archaeologists discovered clay strips containing an imperial decree from Qin Shi Huang's reign, demanding reports from provinces across the empire on their efforts to find the elixir of life. The replies were mostly excuses. One village claimed to have found a promising herb on a local mountain. Others admitted they had found nothing yet but would keep searching. The emperor also consulted his physicians, who prepared mercury-based elixirs. Ancient Chinese medicine believed that mercury, because it was liquid yet also metallic, somehow embodied transformation and permanence. The physicians prepared pills and potions containing mercury compounds. Qin Shi Huang consumed these regularly, believing they would preserve his life. Here's the irony historians have pieced together from multiple sources. The very substance the emperor believed would grant him immortality may have been what killed him. Mercury is highly toxic. In sufficient doses, it causes tremors, memory loss, irritability, insomnia, and eventually organ failure. Historical descriptions of the emperor's behavior in his final years, increasing paranoia, erratic decisions, sudden rages, align remarkably well with symptoms of chronic mercury poisoning. When we combine this with the 2017 discovery of clay tablets containing his desperate, empire-wide search for the elixir of life, a picture emerges of a man poisoning himself in pursuit of the very thing he feared most. He died at age 49 while on an inspection tour in July 210 BCE, still searching for immortality. The official cause was listed simply as illness during his travels. But the evidence suggests a darker possibility, that every sip of his supposed life-extending elixir brought him closer to death. But the emperor's quest for immortality had another dimension, one that would employ hundreds of thousands of people for nearly 4 decades. If he could not live forever in his physical body, he would prepare for the afterlife with such thoroughness, such magnificence, such power that he could continue ruling in the world beyond death. He would build himself an underground empire. Construction began the moment he took the throne at age 13. His first order of business, even before consolidating power or planning conquests, was to begin work on his tomb. This was not unusual. Most Chinese emperors began planning their tombs upon ascending to power, as the construction of a proper mausoleum was expected to take many years. But Qin Shi Huang's vision far exceeded anything previously attempted. The tomb would be built at Mount Li, about 30 kilometers east of the capital Xianyang, in terrain considered auspicious. The site was chosen for its natural advantages: jade mines in the area, good feng shui, and most importantly, relative geological stability. The emperor ordered that the tomb be designed not as a simple burial chamber, but as a complete underground replica of his empire. According to the historian Sima Qian, writing about a century after the tomb's completion, the underground complex was to contain palaces and scenic towers for 100 officials, rivers and seas made of mercury that would flow mechanically, a ceiling decorated with the heavenly constellations made of pearls, and below, a floor modeled on the landmarks of the empire. The tomb would be protected by automatic crossbows designed to fire at intruders. The whole complex would be sealed hermetically to preserve everything within. This was the vision: an underground kingdom where Qin Shi Huang could continue his rule for eternity. But visions require hands to build them, materials to be gathered, techniques to be developed, and above all, workers. Many, many workers. Historical sources agree on the number: 700,000. 700,000 conscripted laborers pulled from every corner of the newly unified empire, sent to Mount Li to dig, to build, to create. For 38 years, they worked, and their story is what we must now examine. Part 3. The Machine of Recruitment. In 247 BCE, when 13-year-old Ying Zheng ascended to the throne of Qin and gave the order to begin construction of his mausoleum, the machinery of the state began to turn. The project would eventually require 700,000 workers, a number almost incomprehensible in its scale. To put this in perspective, 700,000 people represented a significant fraction of the Qin kingdom's entire population at the time. Mobilizing such a workforce would require a system of ruthless efficiency. The Qin state was built on the philosophy of legalism, a school of thought that emphasized strict adherence to law, harsh punishments for even minor infractions, and the absolute authority of the ruler. Under legalism, individuals existed to serve the state. The state's interests, embodied in the emperor, superseded all personal interests. This philosophy made the mass conscription of labor not just possible, but a matter of administrative routine. The initial workforce came from three primary sources: state laborers, convicts, and conscripted peasants. Each category had its own role and its own story. State laborers were, in theory, professional workers employed by the government. These included skilled artisans, potters, carpenters, bronze workers, and engineers. The Qin government maintained workshops and factories that produced everything from pottery to weapons, and the workers in these facilities were essentially government employees. When the mausoleum project began, many of these workshops were commandeered for tomb construction. Artisans who had been making roof tiles or terracotta pipes found themselves reassigned to making terracotta warriors. Evidence for this reassignment comes from the inscriptions on the warriors themselves. In those times, quality control required each workshop to inscribe its name on the items it produced. Archaeologists have found workshop marks on the terracotta figures that match those on mundane building materials, confirming that regular government workshops were diverted to this extraordinary project. But skilled artisans alone could never meet the project's labor demands. The bulk of the workforce came from conscription and conviction. Under Qin law, every able-bodied man owed service to the state. This could take the form of military service, or it could be labor service. The standard requirement was 1 month per year, but for major imperial projects, this could be extended dramatically. Men could be conscripted for months or even years at a biskad bussing. Time, taken from their farms and families and sent wherever the state needed them. The conscription system was administered through a sophisticated bureaucratic apparatus. The Qin government maintained detailed population registers, tracking every household in the empire. These registers recorded names, ages, occupations, and military or labor service obligations. When workers were needed for a project like the mausoleum, local officials would review these registers, select individuals based on age and physical capability, and issue conscription orders. Failure to report when conscripted was a serious crime, punishable by flogging, tattooing, or worse. The demographic profile of these conscripted workers reveals much about the system. DNA analysis of the 121 skeletons found in the workers' burial pit shows a diverse range of ethnicities. Some matched populations from the central Yellow River Valley. Others showed genetic markers suggesting origins in the Yangtze River Basin to the south, or from minority ethnic groups in the peripheral regions of the empire. This diversity was deliberate. By drawing workers from across the empire, the Qin government ensured that no single region was depleted of its workforce entirely, and it made organized resistance more difficult when workers had no shared language or cultural background. The age range of the workers was also revealing. The skeletal remains suggest most workers were between 15 and 40 years old, with an average age in the mid-20s. But let that sink in for a moment. 15 years old. The youngest workers were children by our standards, teenagers conscripted for hard labor that would break adult bodies. The forensic evidence tells us more about these young workers than any historical text could. One skeleton from the burial pit belonged to someone who had been approximately 16 years old at death. His spine showed the kind of compression damage usually seen in much older individuals, the result of years of carrying loads that no teenager should have been forced to bear. His leg bones showed stress fractures that had healed poorly, suggesting he'd continued working through injuries that should have ended his service. He would have been 13 or 14 when conscripted. He died before his 18th birthday. He never got to go home. Multiply that story by 700,000. That's the real math of the Terracotta Army. Not just the impressive statistics of tons of clay and thousands of soldiers, but individual teenagers, individual fathers, individual sons who were taken from their families and never returned. This makes sense from a labor perspective. Younger workers were stronger, more adaptable, and less likely to have family obligations that might make them resist conscription. Boys as young as 15 were not uncommon in such projects, often starting as assistants and learning skills as they worked. But understanding the logic doesn't diminish the tragedy. But conscription of free peasants was only part of the workforce. A significant portion came from convicts, and here we must understand the Qin legal system to grasp what this meant. Under Qin law, offenses that might earn a fine or brief imprisonment in other societies instead resulted in penal servitude. Crimes ranging from theft to failing to pay taxes to criticizing the government could result in sentences of hard labor. The most common punishments were 5 years or 10 years of penal labor, though life sentences were also imposed for serious offenses. Convict labor had several advantages from the state's perspective. First, convicts had no choice and could be worked harder than conscripted peasants. Second, they could be kept on the project for years without the administrative burden of rotating new workers in and out. Third, their presence served as a deterrent to others. Peasants conscripted for labor service could look at the convicts and see what awaited them if they broke the law. The distinction between conscripted workers and convicts was often meaningful in theory, but blurred in practice. Conscripts who tried to flee or who performed their work poorly could find their status changed to convict through summary punishment. This created a system where the threat of downward mobility kept workers compliant. You might have been conscripted initially, but one act of defiance could see you reclassified as a criminal and sentenced to additional years of service. The logistics of moving 700,000 people to a single site over the course of 38 years was itself an enormous undertaking. Workers came in waves, with the numbers increasing as construction progressed. In the early years, when the project was primarily excavation and foundation work, perhaps tens of thousands were employed. But as the scale of the vision became clear, especially after 221 BCE when China was unified and resources from the entire empire became available, the workforce swelled dramatically. Transportation to the site was often the workers' first ordeal. Men conscripted from the southern kingdoms might travel hundreds of miles on foot, carrying their own provisions for the journey. Those from the far west or east faced similar marches. The state provided way stations along major routes where workers could rest and resupply, but these facilities were basic at best. Many workers arrived at Mount Lee already exhausted, having walked for weeks to reach the construction site. Upon arrival, workers were organized into units based on their skills and their status. Skilled artisans, the potters and bronze workers and carpenters, were assigned to specialized workshops where they would create the components of the underground army and the tomb's other features. Unskilled laborers, the vast majority, were assigned to excavation, hauling materials, moving earth, and building structures. The organization was military in nature. Workers were divided into teams, squads, and larger units, each with supervisors who answered to higher officials. This hierarchical structure ensured that orders could be passed down efficiently and that workers could be monitored for productivity and compliance. The supervisors themselves were often either government officials or convicts who had earned some level of trust and authority. An administrative township was established near the construction site, specifically to support the mausoleum project. Called Li Township, it was populated by 30,000 families forcibly relocated to the area. These families provided support services. They grew food to feed the workers, operated kilns to fire the terracotta, maintained tools and equipment, and managed the 1,000 logistical details required to keep such a massive operation functioning. The clay used for the terracotta warriors was sourced locally from the northern foothills of Mount Li. Geological analysis confirms that the distinctive yellow clay matches deposits in the immediate area. This was a practical necessity, given the weight and volume of material needed. Transporting hundreds of tons of clay from distant locations would have been impractical. Instead, workers dug clay pits near the mausoleum site, extracting the raw material that would become soldiers. Kilns were built in a ring around the construction area, within a 10-kilometer radius of the pits where the army would eventually stand. Archaeological surveys have identified multiple kiln sites, their locations chosen for access to both clay and fuel. The kilns had to be large enough to fire pieces of terracotta weighing 300 to 400 pounds, yet sophisticated enough to maintain even temperatures throughout the firing process. Building and operating these kilns required specialized knowledge, another reason why skilled workers were so valuable to the project. But skills and logistics, organization and administration, these were only the framework. The reality of the work, the daily experience of those 700,000 people, was something else entirely. To understand that, we must look at what the work actually entailed and what it cost the people who performed it. Part 4. The labor itself. Picture this. You are 24 years old, a farmer from a village near the Yangtze River, 2 weeks' walk south of the mausoleum site. The local magistrate has reviewed the population registers and selected you for labor service. You have been ordered to report to Mount Li for 6 months of work. You have no choice. You say goodbye to your wife, your infant son, your aging parents who depend on your labor in the fields. You take what provisions you can carry and begin walking north. When you arrive, exhausted from the journey, you join thousands of other workers in a makeshift camp. The camp is not a place of comfort. Shelters are basic, wooden frames covered with thatch or, if you are unlucky, simply open to the elements. You sleep on the ground with dozens of other men packed close for warmth at night. The food is basic. Millet gruel twice a day, occasionally supplemented with vegetables or, rarely, a bit of meat. It is enough to keep you working, but only just. Your assignment is excavation. The tomb requires an enormous pit to be dug, a chamber that will eventually be 100 meters by 75 meters and 30 meters deep. The soil is dense, compacted by millennia. You dig with bronze tools and wooden spades, loading the earth into baskets that you carry to spoil piles dozens of meters away. Each basket weighs 30 or 40 pounds when filled. You carry hundreds of baskets each day. The work is relentless. You begin at dawn and continue until dusk, with a brief break at midday for food. The supervisors walk among the workers, watching for slacking, for slowness, for any failure to meet quotas. Those who do not work fast enough are beaten. Those who try to rest without permission are flogged. You learn quickly to keep moving, even when your muscles scream and your hands bleed from the rough basket handles. This was the reality for the majority of workers at Mount Li. The excavation phase alone, which lasted years, required moving massive amounts of earth. The main tomb chamber had to be dug deep enough to reach below the water table, then reinforced to prevent flooding. Archaeologists have since discovered an elaborate drainage system and an underground dam built to channel groundwater away from the burial chamber. Every stone of that dam, every channel of that drainage system was moved and placed by human hands. The physical toll on workers was severe. The skeletal remains from the workers' burial pit tell a story of hard labor and suffering. Many of the skeletons show signs of degenerative joint disease, particularly in the spine and knees, consistent with years of heavy lifting and carrying. Stress fractures in the bones of the feet and legs indicate repetitive impact injuries. The vertebrae show evidence of compression fractures from bearing heavy loads. But here's what archaeologists found most disturbing. These weren't the bones of people who worked for a few months and then returned home. These were the bones of people who worked until their bodies literally broke down. Some skeletons showed healed fractures that had mended poorly, suggesting the workers continued laboring even after serious injuries. Growth arrest lines in the long bones, horizontal scars that form when the body experiences severe trauma or starvation during childhood, appeared in multiple individuals. These people had known hardship long before they arrived at Mount Lee. The average height of the workers was 1.7 meters, about 5.5 feet, somewhat shorter than expected even for the period. This wasn't genetics, this was malnutrition, stunted growth from childhoods of insufficient food. They arrived at the construction site already weakened. The work only made it worse. Injuries were common and often fatal. Moving massive clay figures, each weighing several hundred pounds, without modern lifting equipment, meant that crush injuries were a constant danger. The heavy wooden beams used in the construction of the pit's roofs could fall and maim or kill workers. The kilns, operating at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, were sites of burns and heat exhaustion. The bronze workshops, where weapons were cast and finished, exposed workers to metal dust and fumes that damaged lungs and eyes. Medical care, such as it existed, was minimal. The Qin dynasty did have medical knowledge. Texts on herbal medicine and basic surgery have survived from this period. But this knowledge was reserved for the wealthy and powerful. A worker who fell ill or was injured would receive no sophisticated treatment. If they could not work, they were a liability. Historical sources from the period suggest that seriously injured or ill workers were often simply removed from the workforce and left to die or recover on their own. The psychological toll must have been equally severe. Imagine being taken from your home, your family, your land, and forced to work on a project that has nothing to do with your life or welfare. You toil day after day, month after month, building a tomb for an emperor you have never seen and likely never will. The work is dangerous, the conditions are harsh, and you have no idea when or if you will ever see your home again. Your 6-month conscription can be extended arbitrarily if the project demands it. You watch other workers sicken and die. You see accidents that crush or maim your fellow laborers. And you know that complaints or resistance will earn you not sympathy but punishment. The punishments for infractions were brutal. The Qin legal code, known for its harshness, specified punishments for various crimes and infractions. Flogging was common for minor offenses like laziness or arguing with supervisors. More serious infractions earned facial tattooing, where the criminal's offense was permanently marked on their face with ink, branding them as transgressors for life. Still worse offenses resulted in mutilation, the cutting off of noses, ears, or feet. These mutilations served both as punishment and as visible warnings to others. A worker with a tattooed face or missing nose told every other worker what happened to those who defied authority. Capital punishment was also employed, though probably not as frequently as the lesser punishments. Workers who attempted to escape or who were caught sabotaging the work could be executed. Methods of execution included beheading, hanging, and the particularly grisly practice of being torn apart by chariots. Executions were likely carried out publicly, where all the workers could see, reinforcing the message of absolute obedience. The evidence for these harsh conditions comes not just from skeletal remains, but from historical texts and archaeological finds. Bronze plaques found with some of the worker skeletons identify them as laborers and convicts, confirming their status. The layout of the worker camps, reconstructed from archaeological surveys, shows densely packed living areas with minimal facilities. The food remains found in rubbish pits indicate a diet of basic grains with little protein or variety. Everything points to a workforce maintained at subsistence level, fed and housed just well enough to keep them working, but given nothing beyond that. Yet despite the hardship, despite the dangers, despite the brutal conditions, the workers did produce extraordinary work. The terracotta warriors they created are masterpieces of realism and craftsmanship. Each figure is unique, with individual facial features, body proportions, and details. The armor is accurate, the weapons were functional, the horses are anatomically correct. How did people working under such duress create such beautiful and precise work? Part of the answer lies in the organization of labor. The workers were not all unskilled diggers. Among the 700,000 were accomplished artisans, people who had spent years perfecting their crafts. These skilled workers were given the most demanding tasks and were probably treated somewhat better than the mass of unskilled laborers. They had something to lose if their work was not satisfactory. Their names, after all, were inscribed on their creations, linking them permanently to the quality of their work. Good work might earn better treatment or earlier release. Poor work would earn punishment and possibly reclassification as a convict. The production process itself was sophisticated, a kind of ancient assembly line that anticipated modern manufacturing techniques. The warriors were not sculpted individually as solid pieces. Instead, they were built from components that were mass-produced using molds and then assembled and finished by hand. Let us now examine this process, for it reveals both the ingenuity of the artisans and the systematic nature of the project. And Part 5. An army manufactured. The Terracotta Army's creation represents one of the earliest and most sophisticated examples of mass production in human history. To create over 7,000 life-sized figures in the span of 38 years required not just massive amounts of labor, but a carefully designed system that balanced efficiency with craftsmanship. The solution the Qin artisans developed was a modular construction process that combined standardized components with individual finishing touches. The process began with clay. The yellow clay from the Mount Lee foothills had to be prepared before it could be used. Workers added quartz sand, mica, and feldspar to the raw clay, mixing these additives in specific proportions. This was not arbitrary. The additives served important purposes. They reduced shrinkage during drying and firing, increased the clay's strength, and made it more workable. The exact proportions had been determined through experimentation, a knowledge base that the potters brought from years of making more mundane terracotta objects like drainage, pipes, and roof tiles. Once the clay was properly prepared, construction of a warrior began with the foundation, the feet and lower legs. These were solid, shaped by hand-rolling and compressing clay into the required forms. The solid construction of the lower legs gave the figure stability, essential given that the finished warriors would weigh 300 to 400 pounds and stand nearly 6 feet tall. The feet were usually made separately and then attached to the lower legs, with the join carefully smoothed. Footwear was added as a layer of clay, detailed with individual laces and ties. The body, from the upper legs to the shoulders, was hollow. This was necessary to reduce weight and to prevent cracking during the firing process. Solid pieces of such large size would be nearly impossible to fire evenly. The outside would bake, while the inside remained raw, leading to cracks and structural failure. The hollow body was constructed using a coiling technique, where long strips of clay were rolled out and then layered one atop another in a spiral, each coil bonded to the one below by pressing and smoothing. This technique was similar to that used in making large terracotta storage jars, scaled up dramatically. As the body was built up, it took shape according to the figure's rank and role. An infantry soldier would have a simpler, lighter body than an armored officer. Cavalry would have clothing suitable for horse riding. The artisans worked from models and templates, ensuring that the basic proportions were correct. But they also worked by eye, adjusting as they went. The interior of the hollow body was left rough. What mattered was the exterior surface that would be seen. The arms were made separately, also hollow, and constructed in two pieces that were later joined. Some arms were bent at the elbow, positioned to hold weapons or shields. Others were straight, hanging at the sides. The hands were carved separately with great care, for they would hold actual bronze weapons and needed to look realistic. Each finger was individually formed, and the hands show remarkable anatomical accuracy. A warrior's hands might be clenched around the shaft of a spear or open to hold the reins of a chariot horse. The head was perhaps the most complex component. Heads were initially formed using molds, with the face as a front piece and the back of the head as a separate piece. Archaeologists have identified at least 8 different face molds, which were used to create the basic facial structure. But this is where the process became more individualized. After the molded face and head were joined, artisans added a second layer of finer clay. This layer was then sculpted by hand to create unique features. The artisans carved individual noses, shaped different eye openings, added varying cheek and chin structures. They sculpted mustaches, beards of different styles, and wrinkles to suggest age. The hairstyles were particularly varied, with different regions of the empire having different traditional styles. Top knots, braids, simple knots, elaborate coils, all appear among the warriors. Ears were made separately and attached, each with individual contours. Even the eyebrows were individual, some thin, some thick, some arched, some straight. This combination of mold and hand sculpting meant that while the basic face shapes repeated, limited by the number of molds, the finished faces were all unique. 2 warriors might start from the same mold, but end up looking distinctly different after the artisan added the personalized features. Modern statistical analysis has confirmed this. While similarities exist, no 2 warriors are identical. This level of individualization in a mass-produced product is remarkable for any era, let alone one over 2,200 years ago. Once the body, arms, and head were completed, they were assembled. The arms were attached to the body at the shoulders using additional clay to bond the pieces together. The head was placed on the neck, similarly bonded. Any seams or joints were carefully smoothed so they would not be visible on the finished figure. At this stage, the figure was complete in its basic form, but still looked relatively plain. Then came the detailed finishing. Artisans used fine tools, probably made of bamboo or bone, to carve intricate details into the clay. Armor plates were carved individually, each showing the pattern of laces or rivets that held them together. Clothing showed the texture of fabric, the folds and drapes of robes. Shoes showed individual laces. Belts, buckles, and other accoutrements were all carved with careful attention to accuracy. This stage could take many hours per figure, as the artisan worked to ensure that every detail was correct. The figures were then left to dry slowly, a process that could take several days. Too rapid drying would cause cracking, so the figures were likely kept in shaded areas and covered with damp cloths to control the drying rate. Only when the clay was thoroughly dry could the figures be fired. The kilns were enormous, capable of accommodating the large figures. The firing process was critical. The temperature had to reach approximately 1,000 degrees Celsius and be maintained there for hours to properly vitrify the clay and turn it into terracotta. But the temperature could not be too high, or the clay would melt or warp. Small vent holes were left in strategic locations, such as the neck, to allow hot air to circulate through the hollow interior and ensure even firing. The knowledge to build and operate these kilns, to control temperature and airflow, represented accumulated expertise passed down through generations of potters. Once fired and cooled, the figures were painted. Analysis of surviving paint traces shows that the warriors were originally brightly colored, though most of the paint has since flaked off or faded. The lacquer base layer was applied first, a protective coating made from tree sap. Then pigments, derived from minerals, were applied. Red, blue, green, purple, black, and white appear in the paint traces. Officers had more elaborate color schemes than common soldiers, with intricate patterns on their armor and clothing. Flesh tones were painted on faces and hands. Hair was black. The overall effect would have been strikingly lifelike, an army that looked ready to march. This entire process from raw clay to finished warrior involved multiple specialized workers. Clay preparers, coil builders, detail carvers, kiln operators, painters, each had their role. The organization required to coordinate all these steps to ensure that components were ready when needed, that kilns were operating at capacity, that painted figures were ready to be transported to the pits where they would be positioned. This organizational achievement was as impressive as the artistry itself. But here's something that will change how you think about ancient history. In 2006, an international team of researchers at University College London analyzed 40,000 bronze arrowheads found in the warrior pits. Using X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, they discovered that the arrowheads within each bundle of 100 formed tight chemical clusters distinct from other bundles. The presence or absence of metallic impurities was consistent within each bundle. What this revealed was extraordinary. The Qin workshops were using what modern manufacturing calls cellular manufacturing, the same production system used by Toyota factories today. Different workshops specialized in specific tasks, producing batches of identical components that were then assembled into final products. This wasn't just mass production. This was systematized, quality-controlled, batch-processed manufacturing at a level of sophistication that wouldn't be seen again in the West until the Industrial Revolution, 2,000 years later. The implications are staggering. While Europe was still centuries away from even basic metallurgy, China was running what essentially amounted to ancient factories with quality control systems, specialized workshops, and production methods that anticipated modern assembly lines by 2 millennia. And who developed these techniques? Not the emperor, not the generals, the workers themselves. The artisans who had been making pots and pipes and roof tiles for years, who understood materials and processes at an intuitive level, who innovated under pressure to meet impossible quotas. They created one of the most sophisticated production systems of the ancient world while working under threat of execution for failure. And the workers themselves? They left their marks, literally. Many of the terracotta figures bear inscriptions carved into hidden areas, usually on the hem of a robe or on the back of a leg. These inscriptions identify the workshop that made the piece and sometimes the individual artisan. They say things like, "Made by the Third Imperial Workshop," or "Crafted by Artisan Li." This quality control system meant that if a figure was found to be defective, the responsible party could be identified and punished. But it also means something else, something the emperor could never have anticipated. We know the names of some of the people who created this army: Li, Wang, Zhang, and dozens of others, their names preserved in clay, telling us that real people with real identities did this work. The emperor sought to control everything, including history itself. He famously ordered the burning of books that didn't serve his vision, but he couldn't burn names carved into terracotta, and he couldn't foresee that those names would outlast his dynasty, his legacy, even his sealed tomb. The weapons the warriors carried were also real and functional. Over 40,000 bronze weapons have been recovered from the pits, including swords, spears, halberds, and crossbow triggers. These weapons were not symbolic replicas, but actual military-grade arms, sharp and deadly. Modern testing of recreated Qin crossbow bolts has shown they could penetrate contemporary armor at ranges exceeding 200 meters, deadly accurate for 2,100-year-old technology. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. When archaeologists first examined the bronze weapons in the 1970s, they noticed something impossible. The swords showed almost no corrosion after being buried for over 2 millennia. Some were still sharp enough to cut paper. Initial analysis suggested a thin layer of chromium oxide on the metal's surface, chromium plating, a technique that wasn't invented in the West until 1937 in Germany. The discovery sparked intense debate. Had ancient China developed chrome plating technology 2,000 years before modern metallurgy? More recent studies have revised this interpretation, suggesting the preservation was primarily due to the specific soil chemistry and sealed environment rather than intentional chromium coating. But even this correction doesn't diminish the achievement. The Qin metalworkers created bronze alloys with such precise composition, a 13-element formula that remained remarkably consistent across thousands of weapons, that the metal naturally resisted corrosion in ways Western metallurgists wouldn't achieve until the modern era. Whether through intentional technique or extraordinary understanding of materials, the workers created weapons that have outlasted empires. The presence of real weapons in the hands of clay soldiers adds another dimension to the army's purpose. This wasn't merely art, but a functional military force, as deadly in death as it would have been in life. But there was a darker side to this sophisticated manufacturing process. The efficiency, the standardization, the quality control, all of this existed within a system of forced labor and harsh punishment. The artisan who inscribed his name on a warrior knew that name could lead to rewards or to severe punishment depending on the quality of his work. The workers who built the bodies and carved the details labored under constant supervision, knowing that any failure could result in beatings or worse, and the pace was relentless. To produce 7,000 or 8,000 warriors over 38 years means an average of about 200 figures per year, or roughly one every 2 days. Given that each warrior took many days to complete from start to finish, this meant that multiple figures were always in production simultaneously, moving through different stages of the assembly line. The workshops operated continuously, with workers in shifts, day and night, year after year. For the workers, this meant repetition and tedium mixed with stress. If you were a coil builder, you built bodies, hundreds of them, each one similar to the last but requiring precision and care. If you were a detail carver, you spent your days making armor plates and shoelaces, thousands of tiny carvings, each one watched by supervisors to ensure it met standards. The monotony would have been crushing, broken only by the fear of punishment for errors. Yet they created beauty. Despite everything, despite the conditions and the coercion, the workers created an army of such realism and artistry that it still astonishes us today. This paradox, that something so magnificent could emerge from circumstances so brutal, is central to understanding the Terracotta Army's true story. The beauty we see today in museums and exhibitions was built on a foundation of suffering. and that suffering did not end when the warriors were complete. For when the project finally neared its conclusion, when the emperor died and was laid to rest, the workers faced perhaps the darkest chapter of their story. Let us now turn to the question that haunts this site. What happened to the workers when the work was done? Part 6. The Sealing of Secrets. The historian Sima Qian, writing his Records of the Grand Historian around 94 BCE, roughly a century after the events, left us one of the most chilling passages in Chinese historical literature. His account describes the completion and sealing of Qin Shi Huang's tomb. The relevant passage, translated, reads, "After the burial and the sealing up of the treasures, the middle gate was shut, and the outer gate closed to imprison all the artisans and laborers, so that not one came out. Trees and grass were planted over the mausoleum to make it seem like a hill." 7 words have haunted scholars for 2 millennia. So that not one came out. Was Sima Qian describing workers being sealed alive in the tomb? Or was this propaganda, an exaggeration meant to portray the first emperor as a monster? After all, Sima Qian wrote for the Han dynasty, which had overthrown the Qin and had every political reason to paint the previous regime as cruel and tyrannical. For centuries, most historians assumed it was hyperbole. The logistics alone seemed impossible. How do you seal hundreds or thousands of people inside a tomb? Who would do the sealing? And wouldn't those sealers then know the tomb's secrets? Then came the archaeological evidence. The 121 skeletons discovered in 2003 tell a story that's harder to dismiss. Beyond the evidence of hard labor and poor nutrition we'd expect from construction workers, some of these bones show something else. Violence at or near the time of death. Cut marks on vertebrae and ribs suggest blade wounds as. Skull fractures indicate blunt force trauma. The positioning of certain injuries suggests these people did not die in construction accidents. And then there's that twisted leg burial practice found on multiple skeletons. This wasn't how families buried their dead. This was an official Qin state practice, documented in other sites from the period. The state buried these workers according to protocol, which brings us back to Sima Qian's account. Most scholars today interpret his passage not as describing all 700,000 workers being sealed alive. That would be logistically impossible and economically insane, but rather something more targeted and perhaps more chilling. The artisans who installed the tomb's mechanisms, who placed the treasures, who knew the exact layout of the traps and defenses, these specialists likely numbered in the hundreds rather than thousands. They knew too much, and according to Sima Qian's account, they were the ones sealed inside when the gates closed. The pit discovered in 2003 containing 121 skeletons was not the only such find. Other burial pits, smaller in number but similar in nature, have been located within a few kilometers of the tomb mound. These were not elaborate burials. The bodies were placed in simple pits or rough wooden coffins, sometimes in cramped positions, that suggest the burials were done quickly and with little ceremony. Some of the skeletons show evidence of violent death. Broken bones that occurred at or near the time of death, in patterns inconsistent with construction accidents. Cut marks on vertebrae and ribs that suggest blade wounds. Skulls with evidence of blunt force trauma. While not all the workers' skeletons show such signs, enough do to indicate that at least some workers met violent ends. One burial custom found at the site is particularly telling. Several skeletons were found with twisted legs, a funerary practice specific to the Qin dynasty. This practice involved deliberately breaking or twisting the legs of the corpse before burial. The purpose is not entirely clear, but it may have been related to beliefs about preventing the dead from walking or returning. The fact that this practice was applied to some of the workers' burials suggests these were not simply people who died of natural causes and were buried by their fellows, but rather individuals whose burials were conducted according to official practices, possibly by the same officials who ordered their deaths. The timeline of events makes the possibility of mass killings more plausible. Qin Shi Huang died in July 210 BCE while on an inspection tour of his eastern territories. His death was kept secret initially by two of his chief advisors, Li Si and the eunuch Zhao Gao, who were traveling with him. They knew that news of the emperor's death could trigger uprisings or succession crises, so they concealed his body in the imperial carriage and continued the tour as if the emperor were still alive, issuing orders in his name. The journey back to the capital at Xianyang took over 2 months. In the heat of summer, the emperor's body began to decompose despite attempts to preserve it with ice. To mask the smell, the conspirators had a cart of rotting fish travel with the imperial procession. When they finally reached Xianyang in September 210 BCE, the death was announced, and the emperor was buried at Mount Li with great ceremony. But the tomb was not truly finished. Construction had continued right up until the emperor's death, and many aspects of the complex were still incomplete. Historical sources indicate that work continued briefly after the burial, as workers rushed to complete the most essential elements. Then, according to accounts, the tomb was sealed. If Sima Qian's account is accurate, the sealing involved closing the gates to the underground palace with some of the workers still inside. The middle gate and outer gate, he mentions, suggest multiple layers of barriers, perhaps designed to prevent anyone from escaping. Once these gates were closed and sealed, possibly with molten bronze as some sources suggest, the workers trapped inside would have had no way out. But we need to be clear about what we know versus what we infer. We know. 121 skeletons were found in a workers' burial pit, some showing signs of violent death. Historical texts claim workers were sealed inside. The burial practices were official state protocols, not informal graves. Multiple smaller burial pits exist around the mausoleum. What we infer from this evidence, not all 700,000 workers suffered the same fate. Most were probably released after their service. Those with specialized knowledge of the tomb's secrets faced the greatest danger. The violence evident on some skeletons suggests executions rather than accidents. The official burial practices indicate these deaths were sanctioned by the state. The most plausible interpretation, based on combining the historical accounts with the archaeological evidence, is that the workers who knew the most sensitive details, perhaps a few hundred people who installed the traps, placed the treasures, and understood the full layout, were the ones whose silence was permanently ensured. Others may have been executed after their work was complete, and their knowledge became a liability. Still others, particularly the unskilled laborers whose knowledge was superficial, were likely released, their bodies too broken to pose any threat, and their information too general to matter. Others among the 700,000 who had labored over the years may have been executed as well, but through more conventional means and in smaller groups. Capital punishment for convict laborers whose sentences were complete, but who knew too much about the tomb's construction, would have been a straightforward administrative act. Records would have been kept, but those records are long since lost. Still others would have been allowed to return home, their labor service complete. Young men who had spent years digging earth or carrying baskets, whose knowledge of the tomb was superficial, whose bodies were broken by the work, they were no threat. They were released to return to their villages, to try to rebuild the lives that had been interrupted by conscription. Many probably did not survive the journey home, weakened as they were by years of hard labor and poor nutrition. The evidence also suggests deliberate destruction of parts of the tomb complex by others. Shortly after Qin Shi Huang's burial, the Qin dynasty collapsed. In 206 BCE, just 4 years after the first emperor's death, rebel forces led by Xiang Yu destroyed the Qin capital at Xianyang. Xiang Yu, whose home kingdom of Chu had been conquered by Qin, had particular reason to hate the Qin dynasty. Historical sources report that his forces looted and burned the mausoleum complex, stealing weapons and treasures. Archaeological evidence supports this. Many of the terracotta warriors in Pit 1 show fire damage. Wooden beams that supported the roof of the pit have been found charred. The absence of weapons in many warriors' hands suggests organized looting. The warriors were broken and crushed when the burned roof beams collapsed, leaving the archaeological site in its current state of partial destruction and burial under 5 meters of soil. This burning and looting would have killed any workers who had been sealed in the tomb if they had somehow survived the initial sealing. But more than that, it represents a final chapter of violence and destruction that the site has witnessed. The workers who built the tomb, the warriors they created, even the rebels who destroyed parts of it, all are now silent, their stories preserved only in fragments of bone and clay. There is a profound tragedy in all of this. The workers labored for decades to create something that would last eternally, and in a sense, they succeeded. The Terracotta Army has survived 2,200 years and will likely survive many more. But the workers themselves, their names mostly unknown, their faces forgotten, their lives recorded only in the stress fractures of ancient bones, they have not survived in memory. We remember Qin Shi Huang. We remember the grandeur of his vision. We do not remember the names of the 700,000 who made that vision real. Yet they left clues. The inscriptions on the warriors tell us some names. The burial pits preserve their bones. The layout of the camps, the remnants of the kilns, the very clay the warriors are made from, all of these connect us to those long dead workers. And in recent decades, as archaeologists have focused not just on the spectacular warriors, but on the less glamorous evidence of how they were made and by whom, we have begun to piece together their story. But the tomb itself, the central burial chamber where Qin Shi Huang lies, remains unopened. And what it might contain, what secrets might still be preserved there, continues to tantalize and terrify archaeologists. Let us now examine what we know and what we suspect about that unopened tomb. Part 7. The Unopened Chamber. At the center of the vast necropolis, beneath a pyramid-shaped mound of rammed earth that rises 60 meters above the plain, lies a chamber that has not been opened in more than 2,200 years. This is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang himself, the emperor's actual resting place, and it remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries and most tempting prizes. The mound is enormous, originally about 115 meters tall, though erosion has reduced it somewhat. It has a square base measuring about 350 meters on each side, covering an area of roughly 12 hectares. This makes it larger in footprint than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The entire structure is artificial, built from layer upon layer of rammed earth, packed so tightly that it has remained stable for millennia. Beneath this protective mound lies the burial chamber. What we know about the interior comes primarily from Sima Qian's account, supplemented by modern, non-invasive archaeological techniques. Sima described an underground palace of astonishing complexity. He wrote that the workers dug down until they reached the water table at about 30 meters depth, then sealed the chamber with bronze to make it waterproof. Inside, they constructed palaces and scenic towers for 100 officials. The ceiling was decorated with pearls to represent the stars and heavenly constellations. The floor was a map of the empire, with its major geographic features represented. But the most famous element of Sima's description concerns the rivers. He wrote that the major rivers of China, the Yellow River and the Yangtze, were simulated using mercury, and that these rivers were set to flow mechanically into a great sea, also made of mercury. Mercury was chosen because it could flow like water, yet remain eternally liquid, a symbol of permanence and transformation. The amount of mercury required for such rivers would have been substantial, possibly hundreds of tons. For nearly 2,000 years, scholars dismissed this as poetic exaggeration or outright fantasy. Mercury was valuable in ancient China, used in medicine and alchemy. Using hundreds of tons of it to create artificial rivers in a tomb seemed absurd. Rivers of mercury? It was the stuff of myth, like the tales of automatic crossbow traps or pearled constellations on the ceiling. Then, in the 1980s, Chinese researchers decided to test the myth scientifically. They began taking soil samples from various points around and on top of the tomb mound, analyzing them for mercury content. The results changed everything. The soil above and around the tomb showed mercury concentrations significantly higher than natural background levels. In some places, 10 to 20 times higher than normal. But the distribution pattern was what truly stunned researchers. The mercury wasn't randomly scattered. When they mapped the concentrations across the tomb site, the highest levels appeared exactly where Sima Qian's description would place them. In the northeast, corresponding to the Yellow River's location, and in the south, matching the Yangtze's position. The ancient historian had been telling the truth. The mercury rivers were real. More recent studies have confirmed this with even more precision. In 2016, researchers used differential absorption LiDAR, a form of laser remote sensing, to measure mercury vapor in the air around the tomb mound. They detected airborne mercury concentrations of up to 27 nanograms per cubic meter, significantly higher than the typical 5 to 10 nanograms found in the region. These elevated concentrations suggest that mercury vapor is slowly escaping from the tomb, probably through cracks or geological shifts in the seal that have developed over 2 millennia. A study published in early 2025 delivered what many researchers had suspected but couldn't prove. The tomb is slowly leaking. High-resolution laser measurements detected mercury vapor seeping through minute fissures in the earth, escaping from a chamber that has been sealed for 2,200 years. This revelation changes everything. The tomb isn't just a historical artifact, it's an active containment system that's beginning to fail. Every year, more mercury escapes. Every year, the seal weakens slightly. The emperor who sought to preserve himself forever created a time bomb that's still ticking after 2 millennia. And here's the truly unsettling part. If the mercury preservation technique Sima Qian described is accurate, if the emperor's body was indeed surrounded by these toxic rivers, then there's a possibility, slim but not impossible, that some organic material might have been preserved by the mercury's antimicrobial properties. Opening the tomb could mean confronting not just treasures and traps, but the actual remains of China's first emperor, suspended in a poisonous embrace. Which means two things. First, Sima Qian's account, long dismissed as myth, has been validated point by modern science. The rivers are real. The scale is accurate. The danger is genuine. And second, opening the tomb isn't just technically challenging or ethically complex, it's potentially lethal. The emperor who died from mercury poisoning may have created a monument that could poison anyone who tries to reach him. But if mercury is present in such quantities, it presents a major hazard. Mercury vapor is highly toxic. Even brief exposure to elevated levels can cause neurological damage, respiratory problems, and organ failure. Prolonged exposure is often fatal. If archaeologists were to open the tomb and disturb the mercury, they could release dangerous levels of vapor. Workers entering the tomb without proper protective equipment would be poisoned. Even with modern respirators and hazmat suits, the risk would be significant. This is one of the primary reasons why the Chinese government has chosen not to excavate the central tomb chamber. The other major reason is conservation. When the terracotta warriors were first excavated in the 1970s, archaeologists discovered that many of the figures had originally been painted in bright colors. The paint was still present, protected by the soil that had buried them. But within seconds of exposure to air, the lacquer base layer began to curl and crack. Within minutes, paint flakes began falling off. By the time the figures could be properly documented and conserved, most had lost their original colors. This experience taught a harsh lesson. Sometimes exposure destroys what it reveals. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang likely contains organic materials, silk textiles, wooden artifacts, bamboo documents, perhaps even the emperor's actual remains, all of which have been preserved by the sealed, stable environment. Opening the tomb would expose all of this to air, light, and changes in temperature and humidity. Organic materials would begin to degrade immediately. Textiles would disintegrate, wood would crack and warp, documents would fade or crumble. Current conservation technology is not advanced enough to preserve everything that might be found. Chinese archaeologists, in consultation with international experts, have concluded that it is better to leave the tomb sealed until such time as preservation methods improve. They have stated explicitly that this might take decades or even centuries, and that future generations with better technology should be the ones to make the decision to open it. This decision is controversial. Some argue that the knowledge to be gained from excavation is too valuable to postpone. Others counter that a hasty excavation that destroys most of what it finds would be an archaeological tragedy far worse than leaving things sealed. The debate continues, but for now, the tomb remains closed. Yet we are not completely ignorant of what it contains. In addition to soil sampling and vapor detection, archaeologists have used ground-penetrating radar and magnetic surveys to create a rough map of the interior structure. These surveys reveal a complex of chambers and passages beneath the mound. The burial chamber itself appears to be about 80 meters by 50 meters, larger than a football field, with a high ceiling, just as Sima described. Magnetic surveys have detected large concentrations of metal in certain areas, consistent with the bronze described by Sima as being used to seal the chamber against water. They have also detected what appear to be coins, thousands of them scattered in certain areas, which would make sense if there are treasures stored in side chambers, as the historical accounts suggest. Perhaps most intriguingly, some surveys suggest the presence of structures within the chamber, possibly the palaces and towers that Sima mentioned. These would not be full-scale buildings, but rather elaborate models or dioramas, a scaled-down replica of the imperial capital, complete with its architecture. The idea is consistent with other elite Chinese burials, which often included such models to provide the deceased with a familiar environment in the afterlife. And then there are the traps. Sima Qian wrote that craftsmen installed crossbows rigged to shoot automatically at anyone who entered the tomb. He described a mechanism whereby opening a door or disturbing certain areas would trigger these weapons. Are such traps real? And if so, do they still function after 200 years? The crossbows themselves would have been made of wood and sinew, materials that would have degraded long ago even in a sealed environment. But the bronze triggers and mechanisms might still be intact. If the crossbows were set up on some kind of taut spring mechanism, that too would have relaxed or broken over time. Most experts believe that if the traps ever existed, they no longer function. But no one knows for certain. There are also concerns about collapse. The wooden support structures inside the tomb would have weakened over 2 millennia. Opening the tomb and changing the air pressure inside could trigger a collapse that would destroy the contents and possibly endanger the archaeologists. The tomb mound itself, while stable, might settle or shift if the internal structures fail. All of these factors, the mercury, the fragile artifacts, The potential traps, the risk of collapse, combine to make the excavation of Qin Shi Huang's tomb one of the most challenging archaeological problems in the world. It is a problem that may not have a solution with current technology. And so the tomb remains sealed, a time capsule from the 3rd century BCE, its secrets preserved by the same elaborate measures that were meant to protect the emperor's rest for eternity. Yet the tomb is not the only part of the necropolis that continues to yield discoveries. The area around the tomb mound covers nearly 60 square kilometers, and much of it remains unexcavated. In the decades since the terracotta warriors were first discovered, archaeologists have found dozens of additional pits, each containing different elements of the emperor's underground empire. These discoveries have expanded our understanding of the site far beyond a simple army of clay soldiers. Part 8. The Complete Underground Empire. When we think of Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum, we think of warriors. Row upon row of terracotta soldiers standing in battle formation. But the 3 warrior pits are only a small fraction of a much larger complex, an underground recreation of the emperor's entire realm. Over 600 pits and burial sites have been identified within the necropolis, and only a small portion have been excavated. Each new discovery reveals another aspect of the world the emperor wanted to take with him into death. Consider the bronze chariots. In 1980, archaeologists discovered 2 elaborate bronze chariots buried in a pit near the tomb mound. These were not full-size working vehicles, but half-scale models, extraordinarily detailed and sophisticated. Each chariot was pulled by 4 bronze horses, and each included a charioteer figure. The chariots are masterpieces of ancient metallurgy and engineering. They include over 3,000 individual components, many with moving parts like wheels that actually rotate on axles and canopies that could be opened or closed. The level of detail is astonishing. The horses have individually braided manes, harnesses with decorative fittings, and anatomically correct bodies down to the veins on their legs. The chariots themselves are covered with elaborate geometric designs, inlaid with gold and silver. One chariot appears to be an armored war chariot, enclosed for protection. The other is open, perhaps for ceremonial use. These chariots tell us that the emperor wanted not just military might in the afterlife, but also the trappings of ceremonial power and the ability to travel in state. Then there are the acrobats. In 1999, archaeologists excavated Pit K9901, a relatively small pit that contained about 30 terracotta figures unlike any found before. These figures are not soldiers. They are entertainers, acrobats, and strongmen, shown in various poses of performance. They are naked except for loincloths, and their bodies are carved with remarkable anatomical accuracy, showing musculature and bone structure in dynamic poses. Some figures appear to be mid-flip, captured in a moment of acrobatic movement. Others are in poses that suggest strength demonstrations, lifting invisible weights or straining against resistance. These figures tell us that the emperor wanted entertainment in the afterlife, not just protection. He wanted his court to continue in death as it had in life, with performances and displays to amuse him. In 2000, archaeologists discovered Pit K, which contained 12 civil official figures. These are not military officers, but bureaucrats, dressed in the robes of court officials rather than armor. They are positioned as if in attendance, ready to conduct the administrative business of the empire. This makes sense. Qin Shi Huang's rule was characterized by bureaucratic efficiency. He standardized and systematized governance. Of course, he would want his bureaucracy with him in the next world. That same year, Pit K007 was discovered, containing 46 bronze waterfowl. These are not terracotta, but bronze, exquisitely crafted birds including cranes, swans, and geese. They were arranged around what appears to have been a pond, creating a scene of natural tranquility. The birds are so detailed that ornithologists can identify the species. They show the hollow bones, the precise feather patterns, the characteristic postures of real birds. This pit suggests the emperor wanted not just power and entertainment, but also beauty and nature in his afterlife realm. In 1998 and 1999, Pit K9801 was excavated, revealing something unexpected. Stone armor. Hundreds of individual stone plates, each carved and drilled to be laced together, forming complete suits of armor. And not just armor, but also stone helmets. These were not functional armor. Stone is far too heavy and brittle to be practical in battle, but rather symbolic or ceremonial. They represent armor taken to an extreme, made from a material associated with permanence. The creation of these stone armor sets would have been enormously labor-intensive, each stone plate individually carved and polished. It is estimated that it would have taken a skilled craftsman a year to make a single suit of stone armor. The pit contains enough stone armor to equip a substantial force. There are also stable pits containing the skeletons of real horses, not terracotta models. Hundreds of horse skeletons have been found in several pits near the tomb mound. These were actual horses, killed and buried to serve the emperor in death. The practice of sacrificing horses for elite burials was ancient in China, and Qin Shi Huang continued this tradition on a massive scale. Each horse represents significant wealth, for horses were valuable in ancient China, used for warfare, transportation, and agriculture. To sacrifice hundreds of them demonstrates the emperor's power and resources. Other pits contain the remains of exotic animals. There is evidence of a zoo of sorts, with animals from distant parts of the empire or beyond, buried in individual pits with bronze plaques identifying them. These would have been rare creatures, kept in the imperial menagerie during the emperor's life, and then sacrificed to accompany him in death. The exact species are sometimes hard to identify from skeletal remains alone, but the presence of such a collection shows the emperor's desire to bring a complete world with him, including its exotic fauna. And there are human remains beyond the workers we have already discussed. 7 skeletons were found in a pit near the tomb mound, buried with honors that suggest they were not laborers. They may have been members of the imperial family, possibly some of the emperor's children. Historical sources record that Qin Shi Huang had at least 23 sons and perhaps 15 daughters, though most of their names are not recorded. When the emperor died and the succession was contested, many of his children were killed to eliminate rival claimants to power. These 7 burials might represent some of those victims, sealed into the mausoleum complex to accompany their father. There are also indications of concubines being buried. Historical sources, particularly those from the Han dynasty, report that all of the emperor's concubines who had not borne children were buried with him. The reasoning, according to these sources, was that they had no other purpose in life, and so should continue serving the emperor in death. Whether this is accurate or later propaganda is unclear, but the presence of multiple burial pits containing female skeletons within the mausoleum complex lends some credence to the claim. The scale and completeness of this underground empire is staggering. It was not enough for Qin Shi Huang to have an army. He needed a complete court, with officials and entertainers, horses and chariots, armor and weapons, even nature itself in the form of bronze birds and stone landscapes. He was recreating his entire world, everything he had ruled in life, so that he could continue ruling in death. This belief in the continuity of life after death was central to ancient Chinese elite culture. The tomb was not seen as a place of non-existence, but as a dwelling for the continued existence of the deceased. The more complete and well-appointed that dwelling, the better the deceased's afterlife would be. For an emperor, the stakes were even higher. If the emperor could not maintain his power and authority in the afterlife, the cosmic order itself might be disrupted. So Qin Shi Huang spared no expense and no effort. He mobilized 700,000 workers for 38 years. He consumed vast quantities of resources, clay and bronze and wood and mercury. He created an underground necropolis covering 60 square kilometers, larger than many ancient cities. And in doing so, he created something that has endured as no dynasty could. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years, collapsing almost immediately after his death. But his tomb, his warriors, his underground empire, these have lasted 2,200 years and will likely last many more. Yet our knowledge of this site is still incomplete. Most of the 600 identified pits have not been excavated. They lie beneath the soil, their contents unknown. Each excavation is expensive and time-consuming, requiring years of careful work. And there is always the tension between the desire to know and the need to preserve. Should archaeologists excavate a pit if they know they cannot properly conserve what they find? Or should they leave it for future generations with better technology? These questions drive ongoing research at the site. Modern archaeology at Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum is not just about digging. It is about understanding without destroying, about learning from what has already been found, and about using new technologies to see beneath the ground without disturbing it. Let us examine what modern research has revealed and what it tells us about this extraordinary place. Part 9. Modern Discoveries and Ongoing Research. The story of the Terracotta Army did not end in 1974 with its discovery. In the 5 decades since, archaeological work at the mausoleum site has continued, bringing new discoveries, new technologies, and new understanding. The site has become one of the most intensively studied archaeological locations in the world, and the research continues to this day. Major excavations of the warrior pits have been conducted in waves. The first major work on Pit 1 began in 1974 and continued through the late 1970s, when the protective building was completed and the pit was opened to the public in 1979. But excavation of Pit 1 is still not complete. Only about a third of the pit has been fully excavated. The rest remains buried, the warriors still standing in their original positions beneath 5 meters of soil. Archaeologists have chosen to leave them in place until better conservation methods are developed. Pit 3, the smallest of the warrior pits, was excavated in the late 1970s and opened to the public in 1989. It contained 68 warriors, a war chariot, and 4 horses, arranged in what appears to be a command structure. The figures are higher-ranking officers than those in Pit 1, and the layout suggests this was the command post for the entire army. Pit 2, discovered in 1976, waited nearly 20 years before major excavation began. The first formal excavation commenced in 1994, and the exhibition hall opened in 1999. Pit 2 is perhaps the most interesting from a military perspective, as it contains a complex formation of different troop types: cavalry, infantry, archers, and charioteers, all arranged in an L-shaped battle formation. The pit revealed rare figures, including a kneeling archer in remarkably good condition and cavalry warriors with their horses. In 2015, a second major excavation of Pit 2 began, using more advanced techniques than the 1994 excavation. This work has continued intermittently, with significant discoveries announced periodically. In 2021 and 2022, archaeologists announced the discovery of 20 additional warriors from Pit 1, including a general and a mid-level officer. These finds were announced with considerable fanfare, as generals are rare. Only about 10 generals have been found among the more than 2,000 warriors excavated so far. In December 2024, another high-ranking officer was discovered in Pit 2, the first such find from that pit since 1994. This commander figure was identified by his elaborate armor, detailed with ribbons and decorative elements, and his hands clasped in front of him in a posture of authority. The discovery provided new insights into the military hierarchy represented in the army. But the most shocking discovery came just months earlier, in September 2024. Archaeologists excavating a pit within the broader mausoleum complex uncovered a massive casket. 16 tons of bronze and stone, filled with treasures that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of Qin burial practices. Inside, stone armor suits, weapons, over 6,000 bronze coins, jade ornaments, and gold and silver objects including intricately crafted camels. The casket's contents confirmed accounts in historical texts that most scholars had dismissed as exaggeration. But more importantly, it suggested something disturbing. If this single treasure pit required such massive resources and such sophisticated craftsmanship, how many more remain undiscovered? How many other workers labored on elements of this complex that we haven't even found yet? Ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest over 400 additional pits exist within the necropolis, most of them unexplored. Each pit represents more work, more workers, more stories we don't know. The 700,000 figure from historical sources suddenly seems less like exaggeration and more like a conservative estimate. The site is still giving up its secrets, still revealing new horrors and new wonders. And with each discovery, we're forced to recalculate the human cost of this monument. While the basic techniques of manufacture are now well understood, each figure reveals unique details, different armor styles, regional variations in clothing, subtle differences in facial features. All of these help archaeologists understand the diversity of the actual Qin military and the regions from which soldiers were recruited. But modern research has gone far beyond simply excavating more warriors. New technologies have allowed archaeologists to study the site without disturbing it. Ground-penetrating radar has been used extensively to map the unexcavated portions of the warrior pits. These surveys reveal the locations of walls, floors, and even individual figures still buried. They allow archaeologists to know what is there without having to excavate, which is valuable for planning future work and for deciding what to preserve in place. Magnetic surveys have mapped the distribution of metal objects across the site, revealing concentrations of bronze weapons and other metallic artifacts. Soil resistivity surveys have identified areas of different soil composition, helping to locate pits and structures that are not visible on the surface. LiDAR surveys from aircraft have created detailed topographic maps of the entire mausoleum complex, revealing subtle features like ancient roads, walls, and earthworks that are invisible at ground level. Chemical analysis has been applied to every aspect of the site. The clay of the warriors has been analyzed to confirm its source and composition. The paint traces have been studied to identify the pigments and binding agents used. The bronze weapons have been subjected to compositional analysis, revealing that they are made from a 13-element alloy, remarkably consistent across thousands of weapons, suggesting tight quality control in the bronze workshops. One of the most fascinating discoveries from chemical analysis concerns the weapons' preservation. Many of the bronze swords and spearheads found in the warrior pits are still sharp and show little corrosion, despite being over 2,200 years old. For years, some researchers speculated that this was due to advanced metallurgy, perhaps a chromium coating, that protected the bronze. However, more recent studies have shown that the preservation is primarily due to the soil chemistry and the sealed environment of the pits rather than any special coating. This is an example of how ongoing research can correct earlier assumptions. DNA studies of the workers' remains have provided insights into the demographics of the workforce. As mentioned earlier, The genetic diversity suggests workers were drawn from across the empire, but more detailed analysis has revealed other things. Some of the workers show genetic markers associated with particular regional populations, allowing researchers to pinpoint likely areas of origin. Others show evidence of genetic diversity within individuals, suggesting populations that had already been mixing for generations. This helps map ancient population movements and ethnic distributions across China. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones can reveal where individuals spent their childhood and adolescence, based on the chemical signature of the water and food they consumed. Such analysis on some worker skeletons has confirmed that many were indeed from distant regions, traveling hundreds of kilometers to reach the mausoleum site. Conservation work is an ongoing challenge. The painted warriors that have been excavated present particular problems. In the 1970s and 1980s, before the full extent of the paint deterioration problem was understood, many warriors were excavated and lost most of their color within hours or days. Since then, conservators have developed more sophisticated techniques. Modern approaches involve constructing climate-controlled chambers around figures as they are excavated, maintaining humidity levels close to what the figures experienced underground. Specially formulated consolidants are applied to the paint layers while they are still damp, helping to bind them to the underlying lacquer and terracotta. Despite these efforts, it is still difficult to preserve the colors as they originally appeared. Many of the recently excavated figures in museum displays show some color, particularly reds and greens, but are much less vibrant than they were when first made. This conservation challenge is one reason why most of the warrior pits remain unexcavated. Archaeologists know that approximately 6,000 more warriors are still buried in Pit 1 alone. They could excavate them all within a few years if they chose to, but doing so with current conservation techniques would mean losing most of the original color on those figures. Better to leave them buried where they are protected by the soil until conservation science advances to the point where colors can be reliably preserved. Public access to the site is carefully managed to balance tourism revenue with preservation needs. The museum complex at the mausoleum site receives millions of visitors annually, making it one of China's top tourist destinations. The protective buildings over the warrior pits allow visitors to see the excavations in progress and view hundreds of warriors in their original positions. But the visitor traffic itself poses risks. Changes in humidity from thousands of people breathing in enclosed spaces, vibrations from footsteps, even the carbon dioxide exhaled by crowds can affect the delicate environment where the terracotta is preserved. The museum has implemented various measures to mitigate these impacts, including air filtration systems, moisture control, and limiting the number of visitors in the halls at any given time. They have also created replica areas where visitors can see reproductions of warriors and even touch them, satisfying the desire for close interaction without risking the originals. International collaboration has been important in advancing research at the site. Teams from Britain, Germany, the United States, and other countries have worked alongside Chinese archaeologists, bringing different expertise and methodologies. These collaborations have been particularly valuable in areas like conservation science, materials analysis, and non-invasive surveying techniques, where different countries have developed specialized capabilities. Recent work has also focused on understanding the broader context of the mausoleum within Qin dynasty society. Researchers have studied the administrative documents from the Qin period, many preserved on bamboo slips or clay tablets, to understand how labor projects were organized, how resources were allocated, and how the bureaucracy functioned. This documentary evidence, combined with the physical evidence from the site, creates a more complete picture of how such a massive project could be accomplished. One fascinating document, discovered in a well at a site in Hunan province, contains an imperial decree from Qin Shi Huang's reign ordering local officials to search for the elixir of immortality. The replies from various districts are preserved, showing the bureaucratic machinery of the empire responding to the emperor's obsession. This kind of documentary evidence helps us understand the mentality of the time, the beliefs that drove decisions like building such an elaborate tomb. The site continues to yield surprises. In 2024, a pit was excavated that contained a 16-ton casket filled with treasures: stone armor, weapons, over 6,000 bronze coins, jade ornaments, and gold and silver objects, including camels. This discovery confirmed accounts in historical texts of treasure pits within the mausoleum complex. Each such find raises the question of how many more such pits remain undiscovered. And the tomb itself, the sealed burial chamber of Qin Shi Huang, remains the ultimate prize. The recent confirmations of mercury presence through vapor detection have intensified interest in what the tomb might contain. But they have also reinforced the decision not to open it, at least not yet. The mercury is a real hazard, and the lack of adequate preservation technology for organic materials means that opening the tomb now would be premature. Some researchers have proposed using robots equipped with cameras and sensors to explore the tomb without fully opening it. Small holes could be drilled into the tomb chamber, and snake-like robots could enter and survey the interior, transmitting images and data back to archaeologists. This approach has been used in Egypt with some success. However, even this minimally invasive approach carries risks. Drilling into the tomb could disturb the seal, potentially releasing mercury vapor or allowing moisture to enter, and robots have limited capabilities compared to human archaeologists entering a space directly. For now, the approach remains one of patience. Study what has been found. Use non-invasive techniques to learn what can be learned. Wait for technology to improve, and preserve the option for future generations to make their own decisions about how to proceed. This is archaeological ethics for the 21st century, acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, and that some questions might be better left for those who come after us. But even without opening the main tomb, what has been discovered already tells us an extraordinary story. The story of an emperor's megalomania, certainly, but also the story of the people whose labor made that megalomania real. The story of artistic achievement and engineering prowess. The story of belief systems that saw death not as an ending, but as a transition. And the story of how we, in the modern era, struggle to understand and preserve what the past has left us. What then does it all mean? What does the Terracotta Army tell us about ancient China, about power, about humanity? Let us reflect on the legacy and meaning of this extraordinary site. Part 10. What it all means. 222 centuries separate us from the workers, who molded the clay and fired the kilns. The world they knew has vanished utterly. The Qin dynasty, which seemed so powerful and permanent to them, collapsed within a few years of the first emperor's death. The empire fragmented, civil war raged, and a new dynasty, the Han, emerged from the chaos. The Han would last 400 years, long enough that many Chinese today still call themselves Han rather than Qin. But the tomb remains, the warriors remain, and through them we can glimpse that vanished world in ways that no text could convey. The Terracotta Army tells us first about the nature of power in ancient China. The ability to mobilize 700,000 workers for nearly 4 decades, to command resources on such a scale, to create such a monument, this represents power of an almost incomprehensible magnitude. The first emperor's authority was absolute, derived from the philosophy of legalism that placed the ruler above all law and morality. His will was implemented by a bureaucracy that administered everything from warfare to taxation to labor conscription with ruthless efficiency. This kind of power was built on several foundations. Military strength was primary. The Qin state conquered its rivals through superior military organization, better weapons, and more effective tactics. But military conquest alone does not create lasting empire. The Qin also excelled at administration, at creating systems that could govern vast territories and diverse populations. The standardization of writing, currency, measurements, even cart axle widths, these were administrative tools that made the empire manageable. The Terracotta Army is itself a product of this administrative efficiency. The manufacture of 7,000 warriors using assembly line techniques, the organization of workshops and kilns, the quality control systems that required artisans to inscribe their names, all of this reflects a sophisticated understanding of management and production. In some ways, the Qin dynasty anticipated concepts of mass production that would not be fully realized in the West until the Industrial Revolution 2 millennia later. But this efficiency came at a cost. The Qin dynasty was feared more than loved. Its laws were harsh, its punishments brutal, its demands on the population onerous. People obeyed not out of loyalty, but out of fear. When the first emperor died and succession disputes weakened the central authority, the empire collapsed with astonishing speed. Within 4 years, the Qin dynasty was gone, replaced by the Han, who deliberately styled themselves as a kinder, more benevolent alternative. The Terracotta Army also tells us about beliefs in the afterlife. The Chinese did not believe in a paradise or a punishment in the way that monotheistic religions do. Instead, they believed in a continuation of existence, where the dead would require in the next world what they had required in this one. For an emperor, this meant power, wealth, military protection, entertainment, bureaucracy, everything needed to continue ruling. This belief drove extraordinary investment in funerary preparations. Qin Shi Huang was not unusual in building an elaborate tomb. He was unusual only in the scale of his ambition. Other elite burials from this period show similar patterns, though on smaller scales. Clay figures, bronze vessels, jade ornaments. These were standard grave goods for the wealthy. The emperor simply took these customs to an extreme. The Terracotta Army also represents a transitional moment in Chinese funeral practices. Earlier, in the Shang and Zhou dynasties, elite burials often involved human sacrifice. Servants, wives, soldiers, even children were killed and buried with the deceased so they could serve in the afterlife. By the Qin period, this practice was falling out of favor, at least for soldiers. Rather than kill actual soldiers and bury them, the Qin created terracotta replicas. This was a significant ethical evolution. The terracotta soldiers represent a choice to use substitutes rather than actual human victims, at least for this category of burial. Goods. Of course, as we have seen, workers and concubines may still have been sacrificed, so the ethics were not entirely consistent. But the use of terracotta rather than human sacrificial victims for the military guard represented progress of a sort. The craftsmanship of the warriors tells us about the state of Chinese art and technology in the 3rd century BCE. The level of realism in the figures, the attention to anatomical accuracy, the individualization of features, all of this shows sophisticated artistic understanding. The bronze weapons demonstrate advanced metallurgy. The construction techniques show engineering knowledge. The paint chemistry reveals understanding of materials science. In many ways, ancient China was more technologically advanced than contemporary Europe. Chinese bronze working, pottery, silk production, and many other technologies were the finest in the world at this time. The Terracotta Army is a showcase of these capabilities. Each warrior is a statement. Look what we can do. Look at the skill and knowledge we possess. But it is also a statement of inequality. The emperor commands, and hundreds of thousands obey. The emperor dreams of immortality, and others die to make that dream real. The warriors are beautiful, but they were built on broken backs and crushed hopes. This duality, the magnificence and the suffering intertwined, is central to understanding the site's meaning. For modern China, the Terracotta Army has become a symbol of national pride and cultural heritage. The warriors appear in countless forms: tourist souvenirs, art installations, diplomatic gifts, educational materials. They have become ambassadors for Chinese civilization, traveling to exhibitions around the world where millions have viewed them. The site itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as having universal value to all of humanity. This is both appropriate and ironic. Appropriate because the artistic and historical value is indeed immense. Ironic because the workers who created the army had no such grand vision. They worked because they were forced to, because the alternative was punishment or death. They could not have imagined that their work would still exist 2,200 years later, let alone that it would be celebrated as a pinnacle of human achievement. The tourist industry around the site has brought significant economic benefits to the region. Xi'an, the modern city near the mausoleum, has grown partly on the strength of Terracotta Army tourism. Hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops, tour operators all benefit from the millions of visitors who come each year. This is the bright side of heritage. It can support communities and economies in the present by preserving the past. But there are concerns as well. Mass tourism can damage the very sites people come to see. The constant flow of visitors changes the humidity and air quality in the protective buildings. Soil compaction from foot traffic can affect underground structures. Souvenirs mass-produced in factories have little connection to the actual craftsmanship on display. The site risks becoming commodified, reduced to a backdrop for selfies and a source of merchandise. Archaeologists and cultural heritage managers are working to balance these competing interests: preservation, education, tourism revenue, and local economic development. It is a difficult balance with no perfect solutions. But the conversation itself, the recognition that ancient sites have value beyond their monetary worth, represents a kind of progress. For scholars, the Terracotta Army continues to be a rich source of research questions. Every aspect of the site offers opportunities for study. How were the workshops organized? What routes did materials travel from source to construction site? How did the ancient Chinese achieve such precise control over kiln temperatures? What can the warrior faces tell us about the ethnic diversity of the Qin population? How did beliefs about the afterlife influence design decisions? The questions are endless, and there are broader questions too. How do we properly remember and commemorate sites like this? Should we focus on the artistic achievement or the human cost? Can we celebrate the beauty while acknowledging the suffering? These are not just historical questions, but ethical ones, relevant to how we think about all great monuments built with forced labor. The pyramids of Egypt, the Colosseum in Rome, the Great Wall of China, even in more recent history, sites like the Atlantic slave trade monuments or Holocaust memorials, all force us to reckon with the dark sides of human capability. We can create wonders, but we can also inflict enormous suffering. Sometimes the same project involves both. The Terracotta Army is not unique in this regard, but it is particularly striking because of the contrast between the beauty of the individual warriors and the brutality of their creation. When you look at a warrior's face, carved with such care that you can see his individual personality, it is hard not to think about the hands that shaped that clay. Those hands belonged to a real person, someone with a name and a life and hopes and fears. That person worked under duress, probably suffered, possibly died before seeing their work completed. And yet they created something of lasting beauty. This is the paradox at the heart of the site, and perhaps at the heart of much of human history. We are capable of both tremendous cruelty and tremendous creativity, sometimes in the same moment, sometimes directed toward the same project. The Terracotta Army embodies this duality. It is a monument to one man's megalomania and to thousands of people's suffering. It is also a testament to human skill, ingenuity, and the desire to create something that will outlast our own brief lives. In the end, the workers succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. They built something eternal. The warriors have outlasted the dynasty they were meant to serve. They have outlasted the beliefs that justified their creation. They have become part of the shared heritage of all humanity, admired by people from every corner of the earth. This was not their intention. They wanted only to survive their labor service and return home, but it is the outcome nonetheless. We, the living, inherit this legacy. We inherit the art and the history. We inherit the obligation to preserve what the past has left us. And we inherit the responsibility to remember not just the glory, but the cost, not just the emperors and the great figures, but the countless unnamed people whose labor made it all possible. The clay warriors stand guard still, not over an emperor's tomb, but over their own story. A story of ambition and suffering, of beauty and brutality, of human capability in all its complexity. They are silent, these warriors, frozen in the moment before battle. But if we listen carefully, we can hear them, not with our ears, but with our historical imagination. We can hear the voices of the people who made them, calling across 2,200 years, reminding us that history is not just about dates and great events, but about individual human lives, each one as real and as valuable as our own. Conclusion. The sun is setting over Mount Li now, as it has every day for over 2 millennia. The tomb mound rises against the sky, its pyramid shape softened by centuries of erosion, but still imposing. Beneath it, in sealed darkness, lies Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, surrounded by his rivers of mercury and his underground palaces, waiting for an eternity that has already lasted 2,200 years. To the east, beneath protective buildings, his army still stands guard. 7,000 terracotta warriors, each one unique, each one a masterpiece, each one created by hands that are long since dust. They face the rising sun, ready for a battle that will never come. But here's the final twist, the detail that makes you reconsider everything you've just heard. Those workers whose names are inscribed on the warriors, Li, Wang, Zhang, and dozens of others, they achieved something the emperor never could. Qin Shi Huang sought immortality through mercury elixirs and underground palaces. He consumed poison, believing it would preserve him. He built rivers of toxic metal. He sealed his secrets in darkness. And he died at 49, his dynasty collapsing just 4 years later, his very name becoming synonymous with tyranny. But those workers? Their names are still here, carved into the clay, preserved for 2,200 years, visible to anyone who looks. The emperor who commanded 700,000 people, who unified China, who bent an entire empire to his will, is remembered primarily for his cruelty and his obsessions. But the artisan who signed his name on a warrior's robe, who spent his days shaping clay under threat of punishment, who probably never knew his work would survive, his name endures alongside his creation. In trying to achieve immortality through force and fear, Qin Shi Huang built monuments that honor instead the people he oppressed. Every terracotta warrior is a memorial to suffering, yes, but also to human resilience and skill. The workers couldn't defeat the emperor in life. They couldn't escape their conscription. Many couldn't even survive it. But in death, their work speaks louder than all the emperor's proclamations. That's the dark truth about the Terracotta Army. It's not just the story of 700,000 people forced to build an underground empire. It's not just the evidence of workers possibly sealed alive with their secrets. It's not just the skeletons with twisted legs and fractured spines. It's the proof that the emperor's vision of immortality was backwards. He thought power and grand monuments would make him eternal. Instead, his tomb is sealed, his body has been dust for millennia, and his underground palace may never be opened. But the workers he oppressed? They're right there, in every museum that displays a terracotta warrior, in every photograph, in every documentary. Their handprints are still visible in the clay. Their tool marks are still present. Their names are still readable. The next time you see an image of the terracotta warriors, perfect and beautiful in their eternal vigil, remember, you're not looking at one man's immortality. You're looking at evidence that true immortality belongs not to emperors, but to the work of human hands. To the people who create beauty even under duress. To the individuals whose names were supposed to be forgotten, but instead outlasted the dynasty itself. The emperor built a tomb. The workers built forever. That person who shaped that warrior's face with such care, they're here with us now, in this moment, speaking across 2,200 years through their work. They never wanted to be remembered this way. They wanted to go home. They wanted to live. Many didn't. But their hands shaped something that would outlast not just their own lives, but the very empire that enslaved them. And that might be the most subversive thing of all. This has been the dark truth about building the Terracotta Army. Not the story we usually tell, but perhaps the story we need to hear. If you found this journey through history meaningful, please consider subscribing to Sleepable History for more stories from the past, told in a calm, immersive style. Until next time, rest well, and when you close your eyes, remember the hands that shaped the clay.